All right, let's just jump right in. The source material we're looking at today lays out this absolutely wild and incredibly detailed what if scenario. How do you actually systematically take down a regional superpower? So, we're going to walk through this whole intricate plan step by step, and then we'll get into the historical playbook it claims this is all based on. Right off the bat, the source is not messing around. It opens with this incredibly dramatic claim. This really sets the scene, you know? We're talking about a super high stakes, speculative story, a covert op targeting the absolute highest level of a nation's leadership. So let's dig into what this scenario actually looks like. And just so we're all on the same page, what we're about to go through is a completely hypothetical scenario laid out in our source. The date they set is February 20th, 2026. And the target? Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And we're not talking about some remote hideout. We're talking right in the middle of Tehran, surrounded by who knows how many layers of security. The level of detail the source goes into here is pretty remarkable. It describes this 2-year-long intelligence operation, tracking everything, behavioral patterns, communication chains, you name it. Then there's this last-minute piece of intel that just completely flips the script, changing the plan from a nighttime strike to this incredibly daring morning raid. The final attack, as the source lays it out, involved 30 bombs dropped on just one compound, all to make sure there were absolutely no escape routes. Okay, but here's the really crucial part. The source presents this assassination not as a one-off event, but as the very last move in a much, much bigger game. It was supposed to be the capstone, the final piece of a multi-year campaign designed to methodically tear down Iran's entire power structure from the outside in. So let's take a look at how they define that structure. So the source paints a picture of Iran's power using this four-tiered pyramid. Right at the top, the absolute tip of the spear, you've got the proxy forces that project influence all over the region. Backing them up is the ideological guard, the IRGC. The entire foundation holding it all up is the nuclear program. That's the ultimate insurance policy. And at the very apex holding it all together is the supreme leader. The strategy described is basically to knock out each pillar one after the other. So, in this hypothetical narrative, the campaign kicks off at the pyramid's tip. The source describes how the leadership of each proxy group was systematically targeted, but with tactics tailored for each one. For Hamas leaders, it was remote-controlled bombs in a guest house, plus a chance encounter on a patrol. For Hezbollah, it was a single, massive bunker-buster bomb that took out a meeting happening 60 feet underground. And for the Houthis, the strategy was different again. Cut off their supply lines first, then go after their military commander. Next up, the source dives into the attack on the pyramid's second layer, the IRGC, and it lays out this complex, multi-stage operation called Rising Lion. It describes Mossad units spending months inside Iran, smuggling in these compact drones and then hiding them in plain sight, inside civilian cars. So then on the day of the attack, these drones are activated, they cripple Iran's air defenses, and basically clear a path for 200 jets to hit 100 different targets. And get this, the targets in this operation weren't just barracks or, military hardware. The source really emphasizes that the strikes were aimed at the brains of the whole operation. We're talking top military commanders, the supreme leader's closest advisor, and the lead scientist behind the nuclear program. The goal described was to completely paralyze the regime's ability to think, to command, and to develop its most critical assets. And this is where our source takes a really fascinating turn. After laying out this incredibly detailed hypothetical takedown, it suddenly pulls the camera way back and asks a much, much bigger question. It starts analyzing the real-world historical playbook for foreign intervention and what usually happens next. This is the huge question the source puts on the table. After we've just seen this imagined, surgically precise operation, we're now forced to think about the messy reality of what comes after. Does ripping a government out by force actually solve anything, or does it just create a massive power vacuum that leads to even more chaos? And to put a real number on this, the source brings up this, staggering figure. It cites a study that calculates that, on average, 46 bombs and missiles are dropped every single day as part of so-called humanitarian interventions. I mean, that's a pretty stark contrast to the official line of being in zero wars. The source basically argues that this gap between reality and perception is maintained through the really careful use of language. A war becomes a police action. The deaths of innocent people become collateral damage. Heck, even the Department of War got renamed the Department of Defense. It's all part of a psychological strategy, right? To frame aggressive actions in a much softer, more justifiable light.
Building on that idea, the source claims to have identified this consistent, three-step playbook that's been used over and over again throughout modern history, a way to achieve geopolitical goals, all while publicly talking about spreading peace and democracy.
So here it is, the playbook, as the source lays it out. Step 1. If a country's leader isn't cooperating, you overthrow them and install a friendly puppet who will. Step 2. To keep a rival nation busy, you don't fight them directly. No, you fund and arm their neighbors to do it for you. And step 3, which is maybe the most cynical of all, to justify a long-term military presence, you topple a leader, even when you used to support, just to create chaos and a power vacuum.
And the source doesn't just leave this as a theory, it connects each step to a major historical event. The 1953 coup in Iran, that's presented as a classic install a puppet move to get access to oil. The Iran-Iraq War, that's the example for funding the opposition, a brutal conflict that kept Iran contained while also generating huge profits from arms sales. And the 2003 invasion of Iraq is framed as the ultimate create instability scenario, where removing a dictator led directly to a power vacuum that was filled by ISIS.
Which brings us right back to that central question. Peace or pieces? The source now zooms in on the long-term consequences, looking at the human and geopolitical fallout from applying this playbook again and again over decades. And the human cost, as cited by the source, is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. 37 million people. That's the number it gives for those displaced from their homes by the wars that followed 9/11. It's a way of trying to quantify the massive, massive disruption caused by these interventions. This slide just hammers home the source's core argument about the huge gap between the stated goals and what actually happened. The stated goal in Afghanistan was peace. The source points to Taliban rule as the reality. In Libya, it was supposed to be democracy. The reality was a brutal civil war. In Iraq, stability was the goal. The rise of ISIS was the result. In every single case, it argues the intervention left the country in pieces. So why? Why would any power follow such a seemingly destructive playbook? Well, the source points to some pretty classic political philosophy, basically Machiavelli's ideas. The thinking goes that to hold on to power, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes behind closed doors. Your only real job is to manage the PR, to make absolutely sure that no matter what you do, everyone sees you as the good guy. And that brings us to the final, really provocative thought the source leaves us with. It forces us to ask, is it just naive to expect a global superpower to act out of pure altruism? Or does the long, messy arc of history suggest that at the highest levels of global politics, power and self-interest are always going to be tied together, forever? It's a tough question for sure, and definitely one worth thinking about.